started crying.
That's what woman being means to me.
He really is bleeding his emotions. Oh, hi there, woman beings. We were just having a really great conversation, and we're excited to dive deeper into our conversation today about feminist film theory with the amazing Kerwin Kuniyoshi. And so, yeah, let's dive right in.
Is that really going to be our intro?
Welcome to the Woman Being podcast community,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
So, Kerwin was involved in the commercial media production industry for 11 plus, probably 12 now years. Because I feel like, well, still is. But I feel like you've been saying 11 years for the last 2 years that I've known you. So it's got to be 12 now on some level. Yeah. And you were also a film studies major at Berkeley. So that is why he's here today to share about feminist film theory with us. So first question being, can you define feminist film theory? And what first piqued your interest about feminist film theory?
Yeah. So feminist film theory is a subsect of film theory. And so I won't get too far into the weeds about it, but film theory is essentially understanding that there's a conversation happening between culture and film. And film classes in that regard kind of teach you how to listen and how to engage with what is being said. And so there are multiple layers of meaning too, and so it's kind of pushing past the obvious meaning and going further and further and trying to see what they call symptomatic meaning, which is things that people don't intend to transmit, but actually get in there because of nature, nurture, politics, cultural things like that. So feminist film theory would be then just the examination of gender dynamics, especially with regards to women representation in film, as well as women as an audience of film. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it came right out of Merriam-Webster or something.
All right.
Well, and so you started the study of feminist film theory then in college.
Yeah.
And
he pioneered it. He
began
it.
Yeah, I'm a big...
I'm
a legend when it comes to feminist film theory. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Your second part of the question was what piqued my interest. Yeah. So in college we had to take a film theory class as mandatory, and one of the topics was feminist film theory. And honestly, I wasn't that interested in it, just because I grew up in the Midwest, where the term feminist was seen as a bad thing. But once we got into it, I had to read this article called Body Talk by Kaja Silverman, and she talks about Singing in the Rain as an example of the disembodied voice, how the whole plot of the movie is you have an attractive woman whose voice doesn't sound very good, and so they separate her body from her voice, and they give her a new voice that sounds more pleasant. And then when all that blows up in their face, the men repair the damage that they created by Frankensteining this woman together. And it's the first time I'm oh my gosh, I've watched that film, I love that film, but I've never thought of it in that regard. And wow, what have I been perpetuating? And then we got further into it. The first big article in feminist film theory came out in 1973 from Laura Mulvey, who was one of the pioneers of feminist film theory. And she talked about, visual pleasure and the narrative cinema. And at this point, people had been really watching film or studying film in terms of language or in terms of politics, but not necessarily psychoanalyzing film. And so she kind of introduced Freud and Jungian theory into film theory. I mean, she wasn't the first one to do it, but she really kind of helped push that, and especially feminist ideas within psychoanalysis. And so she talked about the male gaze and scopophilia, and how the camera was essentially a perverted man's eye. And I was oh my gosh, is that true? And so I started watching these movies and oh my gosh, it totally is true. You watch a Hitchcock film, you're the dude's kind of a pervert, based upon the way where he puts his camera and what he's showing you, and how the camera also sometimes feels like you're peering into places you shouldn't be looking into. The obvious one would be the shower sequence in Psycho. why should the male be like in the shower? I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what started it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And also we talked about like other examples of that, like with when a woman's walking down the street in the stereotypical film, you know, there's sort of the down up camera move that sort of shows her whole body, and that's sort of reminiscent of the like the up down
Totally.
that women get and stuff like that. Are there other
examples?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think now. Well, in film noir, the big thing is you either have two female characters, either the femme fatale, who uses sex and her body to like lure men into danger, or you have the subservient woman who will do whatever the man says. There's no in between. That's what you get. My wife hates the movie It's a Wonderful Life because the woman in it is like, whatever you want, dear, you can blow up at us, you can run away, you can be a jerk, and we'll still love you. You know, like, there's no repercussions in our marriage for how you've acted towards all of us. So, as, you know, but the classic film. When the Me Too movement came out, and someone posted about, like, what it's like to be a woman on Facebook, and, like, carrying their keys between their fingers when they go to the car. After I read it, I was like, is that really true? And so I asked my wife, like, is that really true? And she's like, oh, yeah, that's totally true. And then she talked about how, like, when she meets a man, there's always, like, that thought in the back of her head, like, are you going to be creepy? And I was like, this is true? And obviously you're shaking your head, like, yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't know that, and part of it is because if I watch film and television, you never see that. Like, you don't ever see in a very casual, you would see a woman looking over her shoulder going to her car in, like, a scary sequence.
Yeah.
But you never see it as she just is casually going to her car. You don't see that, like, moment of, like, okay, I'm putting my keys there, as, like, a portrayal of reality.
Yeah, it's not seen in film as, like, this is every day. This is, like, not just what's happening in a scary sequence or in something that's building suspense in the film. It's like, no, this is just normal. Exactly.
And I think that part is, like, kind of missing from film, is that if these realities are true, and I'm a man, so I don't know that, but if they're true, then, like, that should just be part of the narrative and not, like, highlighted. It's just kind of like, in the same way that people wear clothes in a film and it's not, like, a big deal, the same should be true for, like, hey, like, as a woman, I have to think about this stuff. It's just what it is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in a way that shouldn't be the way that it is.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
It is.
But an accurate portrayal.
Yeah.
Like, this is the world that women are living in, as opposed to, like, sort of Hollywood has created this dream world that women live in where, you know, everything's fine until there's a big serious threat, and then everything's not fine.
Right.
But what film isn't portraying is that the seemingly ordinary can actually be very threatening to the female experience, like the, you know, grabby coworker, or the, you know, I don't even know. I'm trying to think of other, just like male figures or even female figures in your life that have power over you and could take advantage in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. So, like, as we're talking about, like, this picturesque experience of a story that Hollywood is continuously putting out, we're talking about the importance of including all portions of the female experience. What makes a film feminist or not feminist? Like, how do you know?
See, it's interesting because I'm not always a big fan of labeling films like that. I mean, as someone who is Asian, or you could say half Asian, I don't, like, think about films as, like, oh, it's an Asian film. I mean, even Crazy Rich Asians, I know, like, people, like, love the fact that it's, like, this big Asian American film, or Joy Luck Club would be another big, like, all Asian cast, but I never watched them with that kind of lens. Like, Crazy Rich Asians is, like, a comedy with some, or dramedy, that kind of thing, you know? Joy Luck Club is a dramedy. It's like it's a story about family, that kind of stuff. So, like, it's harder for me to determine what is a feminist film. Like, is it because a woman directed it or wrote it, or because a woman or women are the main actors in it? I don't know. Like, I think, like, there's part of the discussion in feminist film theory is that it's not just about who is working on the film. It's I have this bigger like topic of like the language of cinema, and I think like one of the assumptions that is in that idea, the language of cinema, is one, the image or like a film actually has meaning to it beyond its like its story or beyond its themes. Like directors have intentions behind the film, but there's actually the idea behind language of cinema is that there's actually deeper meaning beyond that, and that if we're not cognizant of that, if we are not aware of like the construction of a film based upon these ideas of language, then we're missing actually the greater conversation. So a woman could direct, a woman could write, it could be an all-woman cast, it could be like all-woman crew, but if you're not aware that the language you're employing has actually been developed primarily by men, then you've actually, I think in my opinion, you're perpetuating in some ways the problem.
Yeah, for sure.
So from what I'm hearing you say, it's almost like it's not even a matter of whether a film itself is feminist or not feminist, but about the influence of feminism on film as a whole. It's like, are women included in the cast and crew? Are women part of the storytelling? Are women helping to redefine the language of cinema, as you referenced, rather than like this film is a feminist film or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's super important that we are allowing. Sorry, that sounds bad. That women are directing, women are writing, women are editing. So I'm not trying to diminish that part at all, but it's more to say that, I mean, even when you think about race, and it's important that we have people of color in the same way. But if they don't realize the language was developed by white men, I mean, the first big Hollywood film was Birth of a Nation, where the villain is a slave and the hero is a KKK person. Like, you have to realize that the language of Hollywood cinema was birthed
it was racist.
out of that.
Very racist.
Right. And if you're not actually learning the language as it was developed and then examining it from the perspective of a person of color, then you're actually missing out on the opportunity to change the industry from its core. So the same would be true for women. Like, if you don't realize that the early examples of like film experiments involved women walking across the stage naked in front of a camera and going, why? Why do they have to be naked? Why? Like, what's the point of that? You don't realize that it's because men are like adopting or creating a language that is for them. It's what I want to see. And so if you're not redefining what those, the vocabulary, what the semantics, what the grammar of it looks like, and you don't even realize that film is a language, then you could keep making movies with women in these core positions and perpetuate the problem still.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I've seen as a huge trend. I coined this myself, but it's not a thing. I think the last few years have been like the era of the female heroine, where we have Rey in Star Wars. We have some amazing Disney princess movies with strong characters, but then we also have Ocean's 13 and Ghostbusters with a female cast, and it's like we're taking these same films that we've always had and we're just throwing women in it and being like, okay, we're good, right? And it's like it's more than just sort of creating a female Captain Marvel and calling it good. Like, there's actual perceptions and ways that, even just in the composition of our shots, that we're accustomed to, that like are from the very beginning built by the male gaze, which is not all bad, but it has definitely served to objectify women and like paint a picture of what being a female is that we've just subconsciously absorbed over decades.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that it's all of those things in tandem that really work towards creating more like inclusive filmmaking. Like, it means bringing in and empowering and lifting up female directors, editors, producers, crew members, actors, whatever, but also at the same time bringing that awareness and that consciousness to change that language that you're talking about, whether you are a man or a woman within film.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think that it's the responsibility of all parties included to push towards this like progression in film.
Yeah. Well, I think we've seen too, I mean, like an example of this that I see just in culture, it's not specific to film, is that the objectification of women has become like we're scorning that. We're saying that's bad. We don't condone that. Mm-hmm. However, it sometimes feels like rather than like not objectifying people, like the counter to that has been like women can objectify men. And so like there have been quote feminist themed films that instead of the woman being the sexy assistant, it's a man who's the sexy assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And
Ghostbusters.
Exactly, yeah.
The female
cast.
Which is not necessarily like progress in any way. It's just like a reversal of roles.
It's just flipping it.
Right.
And saying, well, now it's equal.
Right.
No.
But the problem is like
it's not.
when we objectify people like that, we're just stripping them of their humanity, and whether it's men or women or white people or black people or half Asian people, like that's a problem.
Thank you.
And
it is a problem, yes.
And cinema perpetuates, or most of cinema, I would say, perpetuates that and has built a lot of the way that we think about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I mean, another thing that's interesting, though, is that, like, the idea of shooting from the male gaze is actually not only demeaning to women, but it's also demeaning to men in a lot of ways, because the male gaze, like, tropes of cinema see men as very single-faceted characters as well. Like, men can only be this masculine, this manly, this toxic person. They can't show emotions unless it's, like, sports or military related. And, like, they, like, can't have the sort of depth and the vulnerability that men are capable of and do have. Like it waters down men as well, and puts them into a box. And I think that true feminism is advocating for equality, right? Like it's seeking equality. It's not seeking women to have men now be the secretaries. It's not seeking for men to be some sort of subservient to women, but it's seeking for everyone to be in an equal and a safe and a like appropriately conveyed place when it's on the screen, right? So that's like another part of it, is that like there's actually, I mean, which is true of feminism in general, like it hurts more than just women. Like it actually is meant to benefit everybody in the end, because everyone benefits when everyone is prospering.
Yes.
Agreed.
And no one benefits when people are portrayed as less than.
Yes.
Whether you're the victim of that or the perpetrator of that, it's not good for society as a whole. Like it's not a happy thing for humanity, I would say. So
I mean, if you figure that there's a strong correlation between like serial killers and pornography, for instance. You know, so if on a very low level, young boys are subjugated in film to objectification of women, like what are we actually planting into our kids? You know, like it's not pornography, but there's enough of like these little droplets, you know, here and there. Like, are young boys becoming desensitized to like the fullness of a woman because they've seen it portrayed on screen as like, oh, you're just there for my eye candy. I mean, like, I don't know, but like that would be one of the implications of this whole thing, is that, you know, we're teaching our children, and girls too, like how to view themselves and stuff, and
how to be successful.
And when beauty is the only measure of success, you know, like no wonder we have body image issues and like eating disorders and like all of the other things that come along with that, because we've defined the value of a woman based on her beauty and her ability to sing well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the tropes we see is like either the like sexy beautiful woman who's like the object of the male protagonist's lust or prize that he is to win within this film, and then the other hand, if there's other women in it, they're probably sort of funny or frumpy, and they're not an object of desire, and maybe a little bit stupid as well. Like they're sort of portrayed it. Like there's not that in between in a lot of cases. I mean, it's been improving, but
it has been. Yeah, I would say that we've made progress. Would you say that we've made progress?
No.
No, because I mean, at least from my perspective, we're making improvements because there are far more female directors out there nowadays. You know, Ava Duverney, obviously, like the first woman to direct, over $100 million budget. That's amazing, you know. Patty Jenkins, the woman who did Wonder Woman, both of them. You know how, like, I think at some point she was ready to walk out on number 2 because they weren't willing to pay her a good wage. But that's awesome, you know. And there's tons more than that. Obviously,
Greta Ladybird, Greta
Gerwig.
Greta Gerwig.
Sorry if you watched us. We butchered your name.
Yeah, sorry, Greta. I know she's a big fan.
Know you're a huge fan.
We'll tag you. No, so we're making progress for sure. But when I read articles or interviews with these women, they're not necessarily talking about what we're talking about here. And I guess I want to encourage people to realize, like, this needs to be part of the conversation, you know.
So then, on the topic of feminist redefining film from more cinemist. You heard it here.
Yay!
Feminine cinema.
I have a mistress who loves film. It's a cinemist.
Okay, great. Good for you.
I thought it was just feminist cinema.
Someone who's prejudiced against cinnamon.
A cinemist.
Oh. All right.
My wife, actually. She hates cinnamon.
Wow. Okay, good to know.
A weird thing.
I'll file that fun fact away and make sure that I keep that.
In case
I ever make her cookies or something.
Cinnamon rolls.
You gotta know.
Yeah.
Cinnamon-free cinnamon rolls.
Yeah.
It's just rolls.
It's just rolls with sugar
with
on
icing.
them.
With icing on top. Sorry, go on.
Sorry. But as we're talking about, like, diving in deeper past, you know, the female directors, the female writers, and really digging into the culture and the psychology and the why, there are tests, though. Like,
there are tests.
There's what's it called?
Bechdel?
The Bechdel test?
Mm-hmm.
What is the Bechdel test? What does it tell us? And do you feel like that is going to be important as we move forward in redefining film? Or do we need to be creating more tests to check off?
I don't remember what. So
I have the rules of the Bechdel test written down if you want me to say them instead.
Yeah, I mean, it's named after a cartoonist.
Yes,
okay.
She's a female cartoonist, and she created a cartoon that was 2 women, I think, basically talking about how there weren't women represented in film. And she came up with this concept that she would only see a film if there were at least 2 female characters who are named, and also they have to have a conversation in the film that's not about a man. So it's a very, like,
basic,
low bar test,
which is surprising because it seems so simple, but it's actually not. We're not necessarily seeing that passed all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies that don't pass. There's also a lot of movies that surprisingly do pass that are not very feminist at all. One movie that I've been, like, doing some research on lately is Transformers.
Okay.
Transformers, at least in my mind, and I think that there's some sort of consensus about this, is not what you would consider a feminist film at all. It's a pretty, actually, kind of just full-on toxic masculinity, just, like, adrenaline and
Megan Fox,
testosterone
just draped over the hood of a car.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting because technically that film passes the Bechdel test because Megan Fox's character and the mother of the main character, Shia LaBeouf's character, have a conversation about how beautiful Megan Fox's character is. And so they're not talking about a man.
They're not talking about a man.
The mom is just like, oh, wow, you're so beautiful. And she's like, oh, thank you. And like, do. And I'm pretty sure right before that, the mom was asking her son if he had been in his room masturbating and like had this whole very weird interaction. And so it was like, it is a very low bar. Mm-hmm. And it's actually very interesting too, because in the Transformers movie specifically, and this goes into some of the male gaze stuff, is that if you read the script, Megan Fox's character should actually be a very empowering female character in a lot of ways. Mm. Like, she has the most backstory of, like, anyone in the film. She, like, her character, her father used to steal cars. She used to help him fix those cars. That's why she knows about cars, and therefore makes sense that she would be involved in a movie about robots that turn into cars. Mm-hmm. Like, she is actually the person who has like the most experience with cars.
Individual.
Yeah, she's the main character that Shia LaBeouf plays is literally just like an imbecile the entire time who just bumbles around. So there's like the iconic scene where she opens up his car hood and it's Bumblebee, the Transformer or whatever, and she's like leaning over it. Her body is like draped over this car as she leans over it, and the whole time you're watching the guy like look her up and down. The camera's looking her up and down. Yeah. But what she's saying is how she like knows about cars. She's talking about why his car isn't working. She's talking about how guys don't like when she talks about cars, and how her boyfriend at the time doesn't like when she talks about cars because it makes him feel like demasculated. She's saying all these things that are actually like really great points and should resonate with like a more feminist audience, but because of the way that it's filmed, nobody remembers that in the film. They come away with it thinking about how hot Megan Fox looked, and like how she was just a piece of meat essentially to be objectified in this, and her words go totally over your head because of the male gaze aspect there.
It's almost like the camera is like completely undoing everything that she's saying. Yeah. It's like, we're not actually listening to you. We're just like sexualizing you right now. We're just lusting after you right now.
Also, like the outfit. I remember, because in my household, the Transformer movies were like the coolest thing. And she did say something about some cap. A cap was loose. That's what I remember while she was examining the car. But her skirt is like so small. And, like, her top is so small. Like, I literally, as a child, could not comprehend how her short could be that short. Her skirt, sorry, not short. Her skirt could be that short and her butt not pop out. I was amazed. I was like, what kind of geometry is this? But it's sad because she is saying very great things, very empowering things, and the way she's dressed and the camera angle and the lighting, everything, it's just about her body. And it doesn't matter. And really she doesn't, what she has to offer to the story doesn't really carry through because of those things, I feel like, throughout the entire film. And it's like, I remember being just annoyed because I felt like nothing was happening with her, but it was just because of the way she was filmed. Yeah,
she even like saves the main, like, Shia LaBeouf's character's life a couple times.
He would be dead without her.
She has a character arc where she breaks up with that toxic boyfriend that she had, and I mean, she winds up with Shia LaBeouf's character, who's like also not great, but she actually has so much more going on with her that you don't, like you're saying, you don't even see it.
The film, like, as a whole undermines all of that. Which is interesting. It's like you can have powerful female characters, but then you also have the power to completely undermine that power and be like, well, we don't value that in our society, so you can be whatever you want, but at the end of the day, like, you're not a man.
Which a good one to ask about, actually, with this in mind, is Wonder Woman. Because I heard how feminist Wonder Woman is and how great it is, and I actually refused to watch it. I just was like, this isn't interesting to me. I felt burned out on superhero movies, and just because you have a female now doing superhero things doesn't mean I want to watch it. But that's my tangent. But thoughts, feelings,
on
emotions
Wonder Woman. Thoughts on
Wonder Woman, because I don't want to like throw my mom under the bus, but my mom was going on and on about how good it was and how strong she is and all these things, and I was like, this feels like what we talked about earlier, just a man movie with a female doing man things.
To go back to your Bechdel test question, I think Emma's answer kind of reveals the inherent problem with it, is that you can have a film that meets the criteria and still not actually perpetuate real change. Wonder Woman is interesting. I think I would also throw it in the same category, unfortunately, with Black Panther in some ways, because the two, to me at least, felt like they were doing the same thing, which is, primarily, strong, like either female characters or, African-American characters. You have a director who's either female or, and so you have all these things that are checking off the boxes. But then when I watch it, and even like, I get that also like a large community or a large part of the Black community is like really stoked about like Wakanda and that kind of stuff. So I'm not trying to diminish that part. But also when I watch a little bit of it too, I'm like, I don't see you do anything different necessarily. Or like, we could swap out a white director and a white cast and change the dialogue to be like, it's just, that's all you've done. And like with Wonder Woman, she has like the love interest. So like you have to have the love interest, right? I mean, a woman can't just be on her own.
What? A woman by herself? What will she do?
I mean, obviously there's like the whole thing about like, she's from a community of women who are very strong, and so like that's great. But I think also, unfortunately, as a man, like whenever a woman is portrayed in a tight outfit, whether or not your intention is to provoke any kind of sexual thing, again, like boys are trained to look at women that way. And so in some ways, even though it probably wasn't Patty Jenkins' intention, there's a bit of like, whoa, Wonder Woman's hot. And so guys would probably go watch the film, not because they're looking at like, hey, this is a great advancement in like film and like feminists and the equality of women. It's like, dang, and that actress is really attractive. I want to go see her in a tight outfit. Like that's just the reality of all of it.
So then really, when you look at Wonder Woman, even though it was created by a woman, the main story is about a woman. It's really made for men still.
Well,
in some ways, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was even thinking about this as I was watching the sequel, Wonder Woman 1984 or whatever.
I think so.
That one, she's wearing her very skimpy outfit, and I was watching it, and I was like, this isn't even, how does this protect her? Like, first of all, like she's
not practical.
She like will like shield herself with her little arm braces, but like her full like
chest,
clavicle is totally exposed. All of her legs are exposed, and in the very end of the movie, she wears this like full body armor suit. And because at first I was like, well, maybe this is like a mobility thing. Like she needs to be able to reach and everything, but she's perfectly mobile in this full body suit that she puts on at the end, and it seems much more practical to me as when you're fighting like super villains and dodging bullets and stuff, and it felt in the sequel even more to me. It felt almost gratuitous, and I would even say it's interesting because you have the other example of a recent female superhero of Captain Marvel, right? And like, so Wonder Woman has been around for a long time. She's been in comic books for decades. She has been around.
Had a TV show in the 70s.
She's had shows, she's had all the things. Captain Marvel was a male superhero that they turned into a woman for the newest Marvel movies, right? And so there's that, there's an extent of sort of female insertion into male stories on both of those, whether it's just a more masculine story of the superhero narrative. And I do think there is some validity to like the balance of wanting to tell original female or original African American stories, but also wanting to have like the very popular stories be put into that frame as well. Because I mean, I've heard like African American comic book like enthusiasts talk about how important Black Panther was to them and how like they were seeing themselves in that powerful role that usually you saw a white Clark Kent type in, you know? And so I think there's validity to that, but there's also so much importance in bringing forward more original stories that come from the feminine perspective or from a different ethnicity's perspective. And in Captain Marvel versus Wonder Woman, like, in a lot of ways, even though Captain Marvel is just a gender switch, I would say that movie feels more feminist to me because she doesn't have the love interest. She doesn't have the skimpy outfits. She's much more of an independent figure and is bringing forth some of that, like, girl power. But on another side of that, if I just continue going forward, she's also like part alien, right? Like, if you're familiar with Marvel, Captain Marvel, like, she is an alien as well. And so, like, can we only have a powerful woman if she's actually not a human? I think that's another thing that we can think about is, like, sort of only bringing in a powerful figure when it's something that's so, like, fantastical that it's not possible. Like, where's our, like, female equivalent of, like, a Batman, who's someone who doesn't have these superpowers and who is still capable and, like, still strong, and or Iron Man or something like that.
Catwoman.
I think that is another thing to think about with the superhero thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought of when you first started talking. I was like, well, there's Iron Man, like, and I don't think his suit's practical, but you can make a film about someone
Mandalorian.
in a full suit. Mandalorian, which is so good, by the way.
It's so good, and it's so, like, there's so much depth to this person that you don't see. The whole they made a film, and it's not about his image at all. I mean, except his suit looks, like, ridiculously cool. But, like, it's not about his form or his sexuality at all. Yeah. Yet, like, something like Wonder Woman or whatever, like, her form is a huge, like, piece of the, like, curb appeal of the film.
Oh, yeah. It's about 50% of why I think most people go to see it. They're like, she looks great. I want to go watch her for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Mandalorian actor, I forget his name. I greatly admire him.
Pedro Pascal.
I love him. I think he's great.
He is.
He's not exactly a looker.
No. He's in the new Wonder Woman.
Oh, he's in the new Wonder Woman.
Yeah, he's the villain.
Oh.
He's
interesting.
Fun.
That might make me watch it.
But that's actually an interesting tension that we bring up, as we've talked about modesty on this podcast a lot, and sort of, like, the restrictions that have been placed on women on what we're allowed to wear and what pieces of our body are allowed to be shown or not shown. And there's this tension that we are in where, on one hand, we're not trying to produce films that are just women being objects of sexual desire, but on the other hand, we're trying to demystify the female form as an inherently sexual object at the same time. And so, like, I think of a Woman Crush Wednesday that we recently posted about Micheline Bardini. She's the first woman to wear a bikini in public, and she's photographed. And on one hand, it's like, you go, girl, you did that. But on the other, like, she paved the way for women to be able to, like, wear what they want at the beach. But on the other hand, like, she was, like, essentially a mannequin who wearing a male-designed article of clothing that was created for the male gaze. And she received, like, 50,000 fan letters from men. So it's like...
Which, again, like, what do you put in a fan letter pre-dick pic? You know?
I'm telling you, you could still take one. They had cameras.
I mean, black and white, and you'd have to be, like, so committed.
Sometimes to develop it, too.
Take it to the dark room, and they're like,
whoa. Or, like, she's not going to care about that. That's not impressive.
That's funny. Oh, gosh.
I'm just saying.
Anyways,
like, what do you put in that?
Coming back, my question is, like, how do we reconcile that? Like, how do we both free the female form from being this objectified sexual, like, object, and then also, like, not portray women in that way, or not intend to portray women in that way, but that's going to be the result no matter what we do.
Yeah. I was reminded of this film that came out, I think in the 80s, called Witness, with Harrison Ford and, what's her name? It's a love interest from Top Gun. I can't remember her name right now. But Harrison Ford plays a cop who's investigating a murder in an Amish community. And so obviously, like, it's all about modesty. But an attraction develops between Harrison Ford and whoever the woman I can't think of right. Kelly McGillis. Oh, I pulled it out.
You heard it here, people. Kelly McGillis.
Good name.
Yes, exactly. And there's a scene where it comes to its peak, and she strips in front of him, and they consummate their attraction for each other. And I think it's fascinating because it's like this. It's a little bit of what you're talking about, where on one hand there's modesty, but then it breaks through, almost like men can't actually handle it.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, I haven't been able to look at a woman's form in a long time. I need to have the woman stripped down naked for the cop, an Amish woman. Like, I need to break through the modesty of all that and have this moment. There's a photograph I love of Marion Cotillard. I can't remember. She's a French actress. She's been in some American films too. But it's a photograph of her sitting on a bed, and the back of her dress is open, and you can see her bra, and she's looking over her shoulder. And I think it's this beautiful photograph that has sensuality to it, but it's not because I see her form as a body, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The sensuality is because we're in a bedroom, the way it's lit, her dress is partially open. Like, I have enough of imagination to know where this is kind of possibly heading, know? And I think that's maybe part of the conversation, is that there's a way to actually be modest and still elicit from people these feelings that we now have to go full on tight outfits and nudity. And I think that because of the way that things are right now, with how the male gaze is in total full effect and people aren't necessarily doing anything about it in some ways, I would say we have to go a little bit more on the conservative side as we are developing a new language and work our way towards something else. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that it's it sounds very simple, but actually acknowledging with film that women can be attractive or alluring or whatever without taking their clothes off. There's so film has just, like you mentioned, has gone so far in its gratuitousness and just sort of playing into what people seem to want to see, that there's no nuance. And I feel that image you're talking about carries that nuance and that sort of I can see what is trying to be communicated here, and I'm tracking without seeing just a woman laying naked on a bed, and there's so much even on top of that, seeing women in film portrayed as valuable, as attractive, as having worth without having to take their clothes off or having them be the object of a man's affections.
So. How do we give them all those attributes without also making them eye candy?
Yeah.
Which is that's interesting. I never thought of Wonder Woman that way. I had other issues with it, but
not that one.
Now
you do.
I do.
I mean, another part of the conversation too is not just the portrayal on film. It's that for a long time, women weren't even really thought of as the audience.
Yeah.
There's another famous feminist film theorist, Mary Doan, I think her name is. But that's what she wrote about. She wrote about how the audience is predominantly seen as male. And so not only is the makers doing what they want to do, seeing what they want to see, but the audience itself, we're not thinking about what women want to see. Or we'll throw them kind of a bone and we made, I don't know, a Betty Davis movie, what's a famous Betty Davis movie where she won an Academy Award? Shoot, can't pull it out right now. But it wasn't you didn't have films in the 50s and 60s with strong female characters and strong female leads. Joan Crawford and Janet Leigh, and there's a whole string of really great female actors. But the audience was still mostly men. that's what they were appealing towards. And so there's like these, if you watch those films, you're like, oh, there's the moment that like it goes from like just being a female film to like you pandering to the audience now. You're giving the man exactly what he wants, even though he's like come to this like chick flick where, you know, we use like a really derogatory term, you know?
Yeah. It makes me think of like the children's movies that have like adult jokes thrown in so that the parents can make it through the children's movie. It's like, oh, here's something for the man to be able to get through this movie. Like, because this is apparently what you need to sustain you through a film.
That's actually interesting because I see a lot of parallels in what you're talking about with the way that we structure our church services on Sunday.
Whoa.
Uh-oh. And I've heard, like, many times, like, I grew up on the worship team. I'm a soprano. I sing high. Was always like, you can't sing lead because the men won't be able to sing with you and they'll feel uncomfortable. And that's not okay. But, like, no one's ever considering, like, the female range of voice when it comes to, like, who a worship leader is. That's just one example.
Interesting.
But I hear that, like, that I think that narrative is very entrenched in, like, the way we structure our services a lot. Is, like, are the men going to stick around? Like, how do we keep them around? But no one's trying to, like, make sure that women are served or... And it probably serves the white audience, too, I'll add. I'm sure that there's some racial... Anyways, that leads me into a total, like, non-related question. Well, it's related, but what about Christian films? I know you don't like labeling them, but films made with Christian messages or... I know, we can all just roll our eyes now.
They're actually the worst for perpetuating these problems.
I know! Okay, I'm glad you agree.
You heard it here, folks.
Oh my gosh. I can't tell you the amount of times I'm like I've seen in Christian films a woman will bend over and like the way the camera's placed, like I'm totally looking down her shirt. Like in a Christian movie, you're talking about purity and like what? You know, or relationships. You know, we're big in the church about like making sure that like we have healthy, strong marriages. And yet like when I see the dynamics that are playing out on screen, it's like these are the most superficial, unrealistic marriages. And like, I don't know, like both the men and the women are super two-dimensional. And so like, and then a lot of Christian filmmakers don't have a strong background in like studying film. So the idea of like a language of cinema is like nowhere even near the radar screen. You know, they've, hate to say it, but like they've been called by the Lord to make these movies and we're just going to figure out as we go. And like, great. But what you're doing is you're adopting a language that you grew up with that is inherently patriarchal and is oppressive to all these people. So you're going to adopt that in your approach. Great. Love it. You know? So you're making bad films and you are inadvertently doing exactly what you don't want to be doing.
Whoa. Yep. And us, as the good Christian audience, goes and rents out theaters to support the new Christian film. Like, I'm thinking about, like, Fireproof. Do you guys remember that when that came out? Everyone lost their shit. And I was sitting there, and I was like, this is the dumbest movie I've ever seen. Like, you just need to, like, fight for your marriage. And the woman's over here like, read the Bible. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to do this love dare, and it's going to miraculously save our marriage. And it's like... I was like, just my eyeballs were melting out of my head. But we go support those films.
Totally.
So now it's like, oh, we're a success. We can make more stupid Christian films that are not deep with story and frankly don't convey a very good Christian message.
Well, and the problem I see too is that people are like, oh, they keep getting better. Like, every new one is
they don't.
And They're don't.
All the same.
They don't get better. And that's because, like, it's like trying to fit like something into a Hallmark frame, and that's what we're doing. If you try and make that every time, you're gonna get what you get, and it's real bad.
I mean, War Room.
Courageous.
War Room is like, on one level, it's like, okay, this is great. We're promoting prayer because it's really powerful. Awesome. The husband in that movie is like nearing the point of having an affair, and he's having dinner with a woman that he wants to actually have an affair with. And I forget, like, how it resolved itself. But it's kind of like, sorry. And she's like, okay, I've been praying for you. I forgive you. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, there's some deeper things that have to get worked out here.
I'd be like, I'm gonna beat you. I'm gonna throw some stuff. I'm gonna scream.
Right.
I'm gonna cuss a lot, and then maybe
Here's
we'll
your
have
ring.
a coming to Jesus moment.
F you, dudes.
I don't know. I'm just keeping it, and I'm.
Well, because and that's what's portrayed as the Christian female thing to do is like your husband can have process and he can go out and watch porn or have an affair, almost have an affair or whatever, or lie to you or whatever, and your job as a female, this is what Christian films are teaching us, your job as a wife is to sit back, pray for your husband, and then when he finally figures it out, then you forgive him and you can be happy.
Yeah.
And that is not how relationships work.
That's not
I mean, I wish as a man it worked that way, because that'd be super easy.
Yeah. And I mean,
but
it's actually, it's almost heretical because you're putting these women into the role of Christ as this man's ultimate forgiver and offerer of grace.
That's good.
And so if you you're essentially showing them that okay, women, your role is to be Jesus for your husband.
Yep.
And yes, we are all striving to be more and more like Christ, but that we aren't, and we won't be that, and we have so much complexity in our relationships, and there's so much more than just looking at him. Because the thing is that when Christ forgives people, Christ knows them fully in a way that you could never know another person, and has so much more understanding in that relationship with that person, whereas you need to have a conversation with your husband when he comes home and says that he was about to cheat on you. There's so much more to it when it's people,
right?
Yeah.
And it's not your job as a woman, as a wife, or whatever, to just be the hander out of salvation to your husband.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's
really good, Emma.
That's really good.
I think it also tells that marriage doesn't take work.
Right.
It's once you confess and you've forgiven each other, there's no process involved. And
there's
I'm no,
you
grappling
have to with
rebuild trust.
Yes.
I as a wife would be gutted, absolutely gutted, and I don't know how I would move on from something like that, but I can tell you it wouldn't be like that.
And it's just a male idealized version of what this wife character is. It's she's just gonna support me and love me through it all, and I'm gonna struggle, but she's gonna be there for me. And it's
I was honest, so now it's okay.
This is my challenge to you Christian filmmakers. Make a movie with a woman who has flaws, who has an arc, and who grows and has conflict. That would be great.
Yep.
I mean, what if the affair or potential affair is what starts the movie?
Yeah.
The guy comes home and is like, why does my key not work in this door anymore? It's because you're not living here right now.
Because you messed up, bud.
You messed up.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, bringing it back to the Bechdel test.
Yes.
There's actually another test. It's called the Makomori test. And that one was developed because of the film Pacific Rim, which I've never seen.
I remember that.
But from what I've read about the film, there's a very strong female character in it, but her being basically the only female character in the movie eliminates that movie from the Bechdel test. Because even though she is a strong female character, she doesn't have the conversation with another woman in it. And so the Makomori test says there must be at least one female character. She must have her own story arc, which is something that you had just touched on, which is what's making me think about this. And then her arc must not support the arc of a male character. Yes. And looking at both of these tests, actually, both of them are flawed. And one thing that actually the woman who created the Bechdel test has talked about is that, it's not supposed to be the barometer for what is a feminist film, but really it's just illuminating a flaw in filmmaking and a bad trend that we have.
Sure.
And so looking at these parameters, you can see the need for both of them. Having women have conversations that aren't just about men, having a woman who has her own character arc, which seems so basic, but it's something that's not in so many films, especially not in these Christian films that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think that's what's sad to me is like, sorry, this is just a little side tangent, but in the Christian world, we get all up in arms about like whether there's a swear word or not in a movie.
Yeah, you swore earlier.
But like,
I swear a lot.
We're totally content to have our young daughters watch these like one-dimensional like mirages of a human being be their example in their life, and I'm just like, that's not okay. Like that is not the. There's so much subtext there that's being. So it seems like we only address the outright and the offensive when we're not addressing like the underlying. Anyways, my question next is how do we as filmmakers, male and female, move forward into the film world, redefining the language and then being aware of the current language as it is?
Yeah. I mean, something I tell people in general, if they ask me, should I do film school? I always tell them, don't do film school. Film school in terms of like production. Right now, there are so many YouTube tutorials on all of it. It's not worth your time to spend money. I mean, I guess in some ways it is, but a cinema studies degree, it's super invaluable. I mean, the fact that I still have my reader from 20 years ago from my classes in many of my books, I think hopefully shows like how much I appreciate and I highly admire all my professors and what they have contributed. And as a commercial producer, director, editor, I have totally utilized everything they've talked about. But that's how you actually understand the deeper context that we're talking about. Like it's not just enough to have a woman in these major seats. It's important, but it's not enough. And if you don't know how to actually engage in film and in culture with a certain level of knowledge and discernment, you're just going to actually keep going forward with the same thing. Now, I think that some people aren't necessarily geared towards cinema studies. I mean, it's super nerdy. Maybe I'm lucky because I'm half Asian and half white. Like I can, probably not.
Instantly makes you more.
You got
nerdy.
The glasses,
right? Like I'm always straddling two worlds.
Nerd in your blood.
Yeah, I don't know. But that's part of it. I mean, somebody has to be the pioneer that says, you know what, I'm actually going to do all the hard work, or me and a collective. I don't know. I mean, think like all the great movements in art always started with fireside conversations between people who were talking about these kinds of things, and they weren't content, and they started doing experiments, and they started really examining what's out there and what they wanted to do differently to move things forward. But if you don't know that kind of stuff, you actually spend your time spinning on things people have already talked about, have already experimented with. I mean, Laura Mulvey's article came out in 1973, and it was big in like the academic world, but in terms of like the mass world, the culture, people weren't talking about that. Now, like 50 years later, we've got out into public conversation. Hey, guess what? Women aren't portrayed very well in film. Oh, really? That's been in academia for how long now?
Yeah.
And so I think people nowadays, especially young people, they're talking about things that like Laura Mulvey or like Susan Sontag or Mary Doan or B. Ruby Rich or Linda Williams, all these pioneers have like written extensively about. They've studied it. Why go out and reinvent the wheel when it's already at your disposal? Kaja Silverman, and there's so many other women that, I've been out of the realm for a while, but like read their stuff, but it's not just about reading their stuff. Like film theory is really important. You have to understand like how Aristotle fits into it, or linguistics, or art criticism, art history. Like it's actually a very in-depth field of study. It's history, it's psychology, it's sociology, it's gender dynamics, it's race dynamics, it's politics, it's education, it's culture. And if we're just going to go, hey, I'm going to learn how to make movies because I want to tell stories and I have these really cool shots in my mind, guess what? You're going to fail. Not like you may have success in a worldly sense, but if you actually want to change the conversation, it takes more thought than that. You guys have the unfortunate joy of working with me, so this is stuff I talk about all the time, but intentionality is so important. I don't want to ever put anything out there that I've not thought about extensively. And I don't want to put something out there that I didn't open up for conversation either. I think it's important to have, as hard as it is sometimes, to have a different opinion in the conversation. Like, you guys always pick up on things that I don't see sometimes. And I really appreciate that. I might be the director, but I'm not a perfect person. I don't have 100% perspective on like what is the best thing possible for this work that I'm doing. And so I think, it's a hard thing. It's a really hard, if someone actually wants to change film to be more inclusive, it's going to take a lot more work than just putting people into certain roles. And I talk about the language of cinema and like in terms of like feminist stuff, but I don't even know what that would necessarily look like. Like I haven't done the deep dive study to know like, okay, what exactly are the constructs of the language that lead towards that? I mean, obviously we talked about the shot of like the tilt up, or like framing things, but those are the obvious things. There's actually more subtle nuances that's where we need to get to. We need to be studying film to the point where like, I mean, in film, in school, we had to take one scene from one movie and analyze that one scene for hours. Because we're looking at, okay, first pass, just get the story of the scene down. Great. Okay, now let's look at the camera. Let's look at the lighting. Okay, now we're looking at it in terms of acting. Now we're looking in terms of blocking. Now we're looking in terms of like, I mean, there's so many elements to the whole thing that it takes a lot of time to actually study these things. And then once you've done that, you have to research, what's the context for this film? What's happening around the world that this film is a part of that conversation? Was it in World War II? Okay, what's happening politically, but what's also happening, what are the race dynamics? What are the gender dynamics? What is big business? I mean, all these things impact people, whether they're conscious of it or unconscious of it. And we have to become more aware of that. If not, we're just passing these things on to the next generation. So those would be my
few things.
My few things.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that's really important because like so much of art is entrenched and has been established for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Like the way that Renaissance paintings were created affects the way that movies are made today. And that's why when you do pretty much any art degree at a university, you have to take art history and you have to learn about all of that. And so like who was creating those paintings then? It was white men, right? So like whose gaze was being established? It was the white male gaze. So like this is the gaze that's still been perpetuated, and like there's so many other things as well that like come into it. So there's
a famous painting, I think by Monet, of like a picnic. Mm-hmm. All the men are dressed. Women, naked.
Because, that's what I like to do at a picnic.
Right. So we're going to go have lunch. I'll be dressed. You be sure you're naked. But I mean, and so people, it's a very famous painting. I can't remember now. But we study it. And no one talks, at least when I studied it, we talk about the brush strokes and like, this is the beginning of post-impressionism and all that kind of stuff. But is someone going, hey, teacher, why are the women naked and the men not? We don't talk about that kind of stuff necessarily. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We appreciate it because it's art.
Mm-hmm. And it's been like so established as like, well, this is the standard for art. This is the way that it is. This is the epitome of good art in this time. So this is what we study, but like we need to bring that critical eye to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of popping on different things, but like we just watched Home Alone with my kids because it's a very classic Christmas movie. I love the movie. I mean, I will keep watching it. But one of the jokes. Actually, sorry. There's two things about it. One of the jokes is the constant knocking over of the horse derby guy, whatever. And I love it because, to me at least, it's a sign of like, those are typically African American boys. And all throughout the Midwest, you see people with those like, I think they're racists, like they're remnants of racist mentality. All over. I mean, I grew up in Illinois, so I'd see them all over, just like that. I love that it's a joke, that like it's constantly being knocked over, I love the fact that Home Alone, to me, is about what it looks like when both parents are so consumed in their careers that they're not actually looking over their family and making sure that the family is healthy and strong. Like, if you actually look at the film, that's what it's about. Mm-hmm. It's about the dynamics that happen when parents are not being parents. They're more consumed with money and the acquisition of wealth and status. Mm-hmm. That's how we start looking at these films. Like, the plot sure is about a kid who protects his home, it's about catching criminals and it's fun, yes. But John Hughes was a great director and writer in this case, because like he wove in those deeper meanings to it. Mm. But then there are also meanings that he probably didn't know that he wove into it. And it's just like, it's looking at film in that way, being around people who talk about film in that way, so that you're, iron sharpening iron type of situation. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. Probably wouldn't pass the Bechdel test, though. Which doesn't make it a bad film, as we've established. I don't know if it would. His mom is basically the only real female character
there's
that you see. And maybe she has a conversation with the aunt or one of the daughters, but I don't know what they would even have been about.
My favorite line is, really. You're what the French call les incompetents. From like the sister or the cousin. But still it's for the man.
Well, and on her journey back to her son, she had just encountered
She's just talking about how she wants to get her son, which is about a male character. Which is not, I'm not saying that makes it bad.
No.
It's just, it also wouldn't pass the Bechdel test. Neither would Gravity, because the main character, who is a woman, who's an accomplished engineer and astronaut, she's surrounded by men, and there's also barely anyone in the movie because they're in space. So
there's one other guy,
So
So, Kerwin, as we kind of wrap up the episode...
Oh, we have to end?
Something... I know. So tragic.
Yeah. This torture will end, Kerwin.
But something we always ask all of our guests is, what does woman being mean to you as a straight, half-Asian man?
We ask all of our guests exactly that way.
In that way. Just pull all the labels out.
When we have like father, white women on, they're like, what? What do you mean as a straight half Asian man?
It's a good question. I mean, I drove home from work the last couple of days, like actually thinking about what it means to me. This is where I arrived. For me, it sounds like a declaration of what is to be, like what's down the road. I think like as the Me Too movement has happened, like I learned about film study stuff and feminist film theory, I became more and more aware of like, oh wow, like there's like a daily battle that women go through, and what would it look like if they didn't have to fight anymore? And I feel like women being is like, I just get to be. I don't have to put the keys in my hands as I walk to the car. I don't have to carry mace around. I don't have to think about like, is this man looking at me or is he actually caring about me? Like, what does it look like? Just be like, I'm good. I'm safe. I can be who I want to be. So that's what I think women being means.
That's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. It was.
Thank you for sharing. And it's
hopefully
now...
it's soon.
We just
I have a daughter.
Society.
How old is she now?
She's 10.
She's 10.
Oh boy.
She's already. We were having
teenager.
Wow. I got my period at 11, so good luck.
That's why I'm married. I don't know what that stuff really is. I know what it is, but I don't.
So now's the part. I'm just going to segue away from that as fast as possible. Now's the point.
No, let's keep that.
Let's dive into that.
Where you can share resources, where you can plug, where people can find you, you know?
People don't want to find me.
Give the people what they want.
Sure. Well, I have the distinct pleasure of launching a new production company with these fine women over here. Who's that? Called Sawyer. And there's kind of a fun story behind where the name came from and all kinds of stuff with it. So you can find us on Instagram, heysawyer.studio. We shot some really fun stuff, and both video and photography. that they were both a part of. Emma helped design the website. Kelly was producer extraordinaire. We've been like editing like crazy. So like, go check it out. It's fun. I don't know if I was conscious of like this conversation, but I think we tried to. I mean, granted, like your husband's the main character.
Yeah. It's a story about a man, yet again.
The male name.
So it wouldn't pass the Bechtel test.
No.
But that's fine.
Maybe next time we'll find a female to be our... I'm not opposed to that at all.
Yeah.
So that'd be one thing we could plug. Resources, I mentioned a whole bunch of women who are really strong in this area. So I don't know if they can rewind and listen to that again. But
we can post resources on our social later, so stay tuned.
And if you look up on Wikipedia, there's a brief article about feminist film theory, and it lists out most of those women. It lists out most of their more prominent works. As a kind of a fun side thing, if you're super nerdy, there's an old film called Peeping Tom, which it sounds like what it is. And it ruined the career of a very famous British director, Michael Powell, I think it was. Like you look at his filmography, very prolific, and then he does this film. It gets banned in the UK, and he basically doesn't work anymore. It's a weird film. But if you watch the Criterion collection of it, they had Susan Sontag, who is a very famous writer and theorist on multiple levels, provide the commentary on it. And so it was really fascinating to watch the film once and then go back and then rewatch it as she's analyzing it from this perspective of like the male gaze and this is like, I think the film was made in 1965. So it's before Laura Mulvey's article, before like we really got into it, but it's really awesome to watch a very intelligent and discerning woman analyze a film called Peeping Tom and point out to you like all the things that kind of encapsulate at a high level feminist film theory.
Let's check that out.
Might have to be a little watch party for the three of us.
It's disturbing, because it's called Peeping Tom. So
sounds probably is what it sounds like to a T. So
enjoy.
Hope you don't
have fun, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to Kerwin talk about feminist film theory. If you loved it, give him a little like and a comment and a shout out. And you can follow us on @WomanBeingPodcast or check out our website at womanbeingcommunity.com. And as we always say, please like, comment, share, interact, subscribe, follow, and leave a review. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.